to Harley Schlanger in Berlin. Of course, we're going to be talking, of course, about the Berlin Christmas market attack, the jihad. We're going to talk about the assassination of the Russian ambassador, and also apparently in Moscow, the assassination of another high-level Russian. So we don't know if there's any connection. We have, of course, coming up in hour 3, Avi Lipkin, all the way from Israel. And Avi, of course, is brilliant. We're going to discuss Middle Eastern matters, U.S. matters, Israeli matters, what's going on in terms of the war and peace. Many, many issues. And I've had Avi on over the many years. He's brilliant in many areas. He's often traveling here in America to ministry to Christian churches, to expose the truth about what's going on. And Avi has, of course, been a great author. I remember delivering books printed here in America to his wife in northern Jerusalem back in 1999, so that's a few years ago. So we go back a long way. The latest, of course, news right now that we're dealing with is that the alt-left are losing their marbles completely. It's just quite amazing to see. And to be honest with you, Donald Trump destroyed the Republican Party as it was, which was going nowhere. The Democrats need to get with it. I just read a report this morning that Obama had put in an order that by 4 years of age, that they have to all offer transgender transference or therapy, and transference, genetically or hormonally, for children that believe they are of the alternate sex. Now, how is a 4-year-old going to know that? Or the parents of a 4-year-old? So this is bizarre. And, of course, we know that as we get more information, I'll be bringing on Sheriff Arpaio in the next probably month, and we'll be delving into the fact that we have a false or fake family, that we know that in fact, we've tracked down the doctor and his wife that are the parents of their 2 daughters of the Obama family, that Michelle Obama is most certainly a tranny, which is a transgender. Probably that's why she thinks there's no hope, because now that we have a uber Christian, we're not going to focus on things like that. We're going to focus on the fact that maybe if you go to a shopping center, you'll be killed by jihadists that they're letting in. I couldn't believe this morning when I was watching the Fox report and looking at the fact that the federal government dumps these people into charities in various states, and the state governors, like the state of Wisconsin, doesn't even know who's coming in or when, or they learn after the fact. But once the charities to actually sign over these emigres, the federal government is not supposed to, quote, break their privacy. Well, I would break all of these rules. The first thing is all Muslims inside America would be tracked with metadata, their phone, fax, and email, all their financial transactions to make sure they're not contributing to Al-Qaeda or in social media. Anybody coming into the country from dangerous areas wouldn't get in at all. And if you came from a non-dangerous area, the 3 types of vetting that I would do would be, number 1, look for any records that they have internationally, which is probably not going to be very much. Number 2, genetic screening, where we talked with Matthew with the monoamine oxidase genes and the tryptophan genes. Number 3, metadata once they're here, or so that we can track everything they do, transactions, travel. And I believe that every Muslim in America should have a tracker on them so that we can know exactly where they are. We also need to have agents that speak Arabic. My son Matthew speaks Arabic. He's actually learned at the University of Portland State University. We need to have people in these mosques tracking these imams. And if there's a radicalized mosque, number 1, the imams need to be arrested that are in there trying to incite violence. We need to also shut down portals of internet sites that are radicalizing our American-born Muslims. We need to also have safe harbor for those within Islam who want to whistleblow on their fellow Muslims, because there's a lot of persecution within Islam of those people who are moderate. And if we can convert and make a moderate version of Islam, wonderful. This is what happened, in the Middle Ages with the Catholic Church after they were killing the Albigensians and many others. The millions of people that died at the hands of the Catholic Church and their armies over a millennium is quite stark. Hundreds of millions of people. So that transformation could occur in America if we give them safe harbor and protection for whistleblowing. We need to also make sure that we fully use metadata on anybody who's suspected, whether they're Muslim or not, but most of them are going to be Muslim. And we can do the same thing in foreign markets. We should not buy any oil, so the G20 nations, from these jihadists. We should cut off their financial transactions and their communications. We have a Hawaiian congresswoman, Tulsi Gabbard, has actually put forward a bill to stop funding terrorists. We lied. Of course, Mr. Brennan, who's a closet jihadist Muslim, head of the CIA, is directly lied to us and basically said, well, these are just opposition groups to the Assad government, when they're not. They're actually select groups that we are supporting financially with satellite phones, with weapon systems, and now with manpads. They can strike not only Russian jets, but also can strike commercial airliners in Europe or even in America, these manpads. So we need to stop this foolishness. We need to take it seriously that we're at a war, rather than thinking we're not engaging in a war. And we need to actually stop pre-crime, which means the use of metadata and the complete absence of privacy for Muslims in America needs to happen, so we can not only make them safe, so that they don't have radicalized imams. In fact, 160 imams were fired within a month after agreeing with Donald Trump in Houston alone. And that's not good, because these Muslims knew that ultimately, if there's enough terrorism, many of these Muslims, including moderates, would end up in civil detention camps, not unlike the Japanese during the Second World War when we were at war with Japan. That doesn't need to happen. Innocent people don't need to be put into these detention camps, but we need to make sure we can validate with metadata and with complete lack of privacy. That means that if we have that, we'll have some degree of peace and safety in America. And it means also that anybody coming to the country with visas are not going to be able to kind of have free reign to come here on a marriage visa like the San Bernardino bomber from Pakistan and shooter. We need to make sure that we shut down internal agencies that are actually hacking each other or the government, such as the Department of Homeland Security hacking 3 states. We need to clean out the CIA from the rat's nest of people that are politicized and literally have moles, like Mr. Brennan, who's the head of the CIA. He needs to be removed, and if they properly investigate him with an independent investigator, they're probably going to find that he is putting in policies in place to put us Americans in danger. So there are solutions. These solutions, I'm sure that Trump is going to do a number of them. I'm putting together a video to explain my take on solutions, because I've worked with Delta Force, with agents like CIA and NSA. I've interacted with these guys for years. They know what the heck to do. They don't need to be taught. You just need to let them loose to do the right things that they know how to do. And they will make America safe, and we will use metadata to make sure no phone, fax, email, social networking, financial transaction, or anything would indicate that anybody is able to do a crime against America. And there's lots of source of metadata that we have full access to. Basically, nothing happens on Earth that our NSA doesn't know. So the idea that we're a victim is plain foolishness. Now, I don't know if we have Harley yet. Harley, are you there? Okay, I don't hear from Harley yet. So that's my solution. Now, people may say, well, you can't do that. Well, extreme vetting means vetting genetically, vetting through records, vetting through metadata, vetting through surveillance, vetting through complete lack of privacy. And that not only are people that are immigrating to the country, but all Muslims. I'm sure that if you're a doctor and engineer, having a surveilling agency also protecting you against repercussions for turning in fellow Muslims that are either talking about radicalization, building up weapons caches, doing simulation attacks, or other things, if you turn them in, you're a good American citizen. I don't care what religious background you are. In fact, if you become a non-radicalized Muslim, more power to you. That needs to happen. And Muslims out there, we know that we can make you allies if you decide that you're Americans first and not Muslims first. We also need to make sure that we have people sign declarations that they will not ever support Sharia law. Analysis was done a few years ago that 51% of American Muslims born in America or here for many years support Sharia. That's not acceptable. Sharia law is directly against the U.S. Constitution. That would be grounds for, as far as I'm concerned, for de-citizenship and for deportation out of the country. If we don't take this seriously, we're going to have major terrorism. I would say things like airports, large shopping centers, large gatherings like stadia with major sports, these Christmas celebrations that are, quote, in the craw of extreme Islam. And we need to take it to them. And here's the kinds of weapons we can use against extreme Islam. Number one, financially, we can cut them off. Number two, we know from metadata their GPS locations. We can send in remote drones. And you may or may not know this, but we have remote operated warrior robots that can go in there and clean them out. We have technologies from space-based weapon systems and radionics and so on that can literally fry them in their own skin. And people need to know that the level of violence we need to visit on these people is far nastier than anything that they think they can do to us. And we need to do it. We need to stop playing around. When we can identify a cell of terrorists planning on killing Americans, Europeans, Malaysians, Africans, whatever, we need to take them out. And they need to know that if we've got their location, they're just as well as dead. And once that starts to happen, you'll see a dry up of their recruiters, because they know as soon as they come up on our radar that they're done. And we can do that now. We can do that. We have all the capability in the world to do that. But we need to realize it's just like the Minority Report. We need to deal with this like a pre-crime. We need to deal with it as pre-crime based on metadata and sources of information, and shielding the people inside Islam who want to work with us to try to de-radicalize their so-called religion or faith. And that'll work. It'll work. But that's the only way to fix this. There's no alternative way to this. If you just think you're going to marshal, a large military force, but you can't deploy them, if you don't have data to know where to target, if you don't use alternative technologies to shut off finances and so on, you're never going to succeed. So, they can play around with it. And Obama is an obscene, evil man. Obscene and evil. Thinking that he can pull the wool over our eyes and bring in, and as Hillary was going to increase 550% these unvetted Muslims, and she herself said privately that she couldn't vet them to make certain that they wouldn't kill Americans. Well, she doesn't care. She's a Satanist. I mean, you have to understand these people. They are pure evil. Now, that comes onto the issue of what's going on right now in terms of the issues that Harley will bring up from his links. Who is the real killer threatening war? And this follows, of course, the issue of the assassination of the ambassador from Russia. It's an open provocation. It's to try to break the bond between Russia and Turkey and Iran, which can lead to some degree of overall peace in the Middle East. Russia just wants to get rid of extreme Islam, so do we. We have the same goals. Now, they may have different goals elsewhere. Also, because we're deploying missile systems along the Polish-Russian border, they're deploying in Kaliningrad their advanced missile systems and so on. I don't think that the Russians want to rebuild the Soviet Union, but they want to retake territory where the majority of the population is Russian. In other words, they want to get Tsarist Russia back. They also want respect. And they want trade with Europe. The trade situation is hurting Europe and hurting Russia. And when a nation doesn't trade, it goes to war. So the assassination of the Russian ambassador was obviously, has all the smackings of a CIA plot to make sure that Russia, which is getting the relationship back after the Turks shooting down a Russian jet, back on track to actually restabilize the situation in the Middle East now that Aleppo has fallen, to Assad. And Assad and regime change is over. Donald Trump is not in there to do regime changes. There to stabilize things, to create a safe zone for Syrians or Iraqis or wherever national groups coming in there. Harley, you're back. Let's go through some of the issues today. I was just opening up with your statements, which are linked. I'll have all the links up today regarding the Russian ambassador, and I'm sort of on track with the idea that this is all of the fingerprints of a CIA operation to break up a Russian, Iranian, Turkish, settlement. Yeah, I can hear you, Harley. So, can you tell us what you take what your take is on the real killer threatening war?
Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you, Harley. Yeah, we can hear him, but he can't hear us. We'll just send him a message that we can hear him, and he's got his mic muted or something. Yeah, I'll send it to him too. Your mic is muted. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, okay, so that's the situation there. The third is, of course, Obama's words are a threat to kill. And people need to understand that Obama his attacks against the incoming president, who is going to completely write off all the actions of the abominator. The latest one, of course, is to try to put a permanent ban on oceanic drilling by executive order. I mean, he's got a pen and he's got a phone. I mean, this idiot, Obama, is a Saudi globalist agent, and he is extremely dangerous. People don't understand he was very successful as a president because he's trying to deconstruct and destroy America, destroy American security, cause race war, class war, and religious war in America, not to stabilize things and to de-radicalize Islam, which he could have been an agent for change, like I mentioned in the last segment. That could have happened, but we don't have that happening. So, again, we're also going to go over the LaRouche's 4 laws. Do we have Harley back?
Not sure what's happening with the Skype tonight, but it's just gotten cut off a couple times.
Yeah, well, that wouldn't surprise me because our footprint in terms of this show, the Nutrimedical Report on Deagle Network, both audio and video, our premium channel on live stream, Vimeo, and YouTube, and many other platforms is now monster big. I mean, when I left Genesis,
well, we know that Putin.
My audience was even greater than Alex Jones, so people need to know that. And people trust the words we have and the experts we bring on, like yourself. And this situation, I want you to expand on it because the outgoing idiot in chief, the abominator, is doing things that are putting the world in great jeopardy and making threats that he can't follow through on.
Well, we know that Putin is not meddling with your website or your Skype. So,
right, yeah.
Look, I'll tell you that just because I know we have a break coming up soon. So let me just hit the highlights of what's happening. You had a breakthrough in Aleppo, where despite the U.S. efforts to continue to arm the Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda-linked so-called moderate rebels, the Russians backing the Syrian army broke through, and this was a major defeat for Obama.
Right.
And it was orchestrated in part by a new alliance, which is Russia, Iran, and Turkey, working together with nations such as China, Egypt. It's the kind of alliance the United States should be a part of. Right. And instead, Obama is out to sabotage it.
Oh, yeah.
And so one of the people who was crucial in putting this alliance together was the Russian ambassador to Turkey.
Right.
And he was gunned down 2 days ago.
Right.
In an act of pure rage and spite. The obvious point is the guy who pulled the trigger wasn't the author of the plan.
Right.
The Russians themselves are saying it was probably done through NATO networks, which means U.S. and British.
Yeah.
And the Turkish president said the same thing. This was designed to force a split between Russia and Turkey. And instead, it's pulled the two countries even closer together.
Right.
Because they're both saying, look how desperate these crazy Americans are.
Right. So they're not stupid. They understand that the space chess that's going on here and how they absolutely don't want any kind of agreement between Turkey, which is a major player not only in NATO, but also in the Middle East. And even going right back to the Cold War issues with the deployment of listening systems for missiles and the deployment of missiles in Turkey during the 1962 Bay of Pigs and the missile crisis.
Yeah.
It's very critical. And the fact that Erdogan is actually cooperating is...
NATO,
go ahead.
It's also a NATO issue.
Right.
Because Turkey has the largest army in NATO.
Well, the fourth largest army on the planet. Their army is the fourth largest on Earth.
Yeah. And the strategy was that Turkey would be part of the Contain Russia operation.
Yeah, not
and that's
happen.
Broken. That's gone.
That's
gone.
Wow. That's big. We'll be back in a moment. Glad we got our connection now. And NSA, keep your hands off my stream on live stream and on Skype. Get your paws off. We're going to say this whether you like it or not. You might actually find that we save your hide. So, Harley, let's continue. So the thesis is this attack was obviously, has all the fingerprints of a CIA operation, perhaps tied with NATO. And NATO should actually realize that having a collaboration between NATO and Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing. We need to reform NATO, not only in just what Donald Trump said, which is to deal with terrorism and also to have them pay their fair share, but also to have a degree of collaboration with Russia and China when it serves our purposes to collaborate rather than to be at war.
Well, here's the point, and this is something that Trump knows quite well. If we're not provoking Russia with putting Nazis in power in Ukraine, in arming terrorists in the Middle East who overlap terror networks in Russia and China,
right,
that if we're not doing that, then we'll have peace with Russia. Then you don't even need NATO. What's the whole point of NATO?
Well, I think NATO needs to be reformed to be... Well, NATO could be reformed to be one that's against terrorism, against extreme Islam, and against the rise of rogue nations like North Korea and so on, so it can have a broader purpose than just the idea of, quote, defending Fortress Europe. And
well, I think we've gone beyond that, because the problem with NATO is that the way it functions is it's part of the global operations that
I agree. That's why I'm saying it's like the Republican Party after Trump. It's no longer a Republican Party. I mean, I think NATO might even just have the name or completely revise the name. But you're right, the whole purposes need to be changed, because it's actually provocational and more likely to actually induce war than to stop it.
And the point is, if you have an alliance of sovereign nations, the way Charles de Gaulle and Adenauer thought about the emergence of modern Europe, they wanted to have a trade zone, an economic cooperation zone, but they also wanted to retain sovereignty and national armies. But the national armies were to take on more and more the role of an engineering corps, which is what George Washington originally envisioned West Point to be.
Right.
And I think it's interesting that we're getting these West Pointers brought in by Trump, because in spite of the corruption of the military and the intelligence services over the years, you still have a tradition at West Point which embodies the idea of the nation. World War II, the United States was effective because of the engineering corps, which surpassed anything that the Brits could do or the French could do. So we have a tradition that could be restored. Now, the Russians have a similar tradition now. So what Trump is saying is, let's work together, let's crush the terrorists. And if you get Obama out of office, that takes away the largest support operation for the terrorists, because it's not that Obama is doing all the arming, but he's facilitating the Saudis, the Qataris, and until recently the Turks in aiding the terrorists. Now, as soon as the Turks turned against Obama and turned toward Russia, the tide changed in Syria, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So we have a case study now of what happens when you have the defense of a nation as opposed to outside forces calling for regime change and then funding and arming the crazies inside the country who want the regime changed.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Now, there's an interesting story.
In other words, Obama is part of the masters of chaos. To create chaos on a geopolitical and financial level, so they try to maintain control, even if the king of the hill is the king of a hill of now melting fecal matter. And that's what Obama and the globalist bankers want.
Let's take a look at the real story in Aleppo, because most of the media in the West is covering reports from something called the Syrian Observatory. This is a group of anti-Assad people based in London who are getting their reports from the so-called moderate jihadists. Now, there's a woman, Ava Bartlett, who's a Canadian reporter who just came back. She's one of the few Western reporters who's been in Aleppo, who's been in Syria. And she said there were celebrations in the streets when the Syrian army came in. Now, what we were told is that the people were fleeing, they were terrorized. The ones who were fleeing because they had no food. They were fleeing to the Russian zone where the Russians were providing food.
Right.
Everyone but Samantha Power, the witch at the United Nations for representing Obama, everyone else in the world knows that the Russians and the Syrians have provided the aid to keep people alive in Aleppo.
Right. Exactly. Pretty obscene, isn't it, when that happens?
Talk about false news, huh?
Yeah. Well, then guess what? Obama and the CIA and the basket of deplorable news media, they're the fake news masters.
Purveyors of lies.
The purveyors of the lying king is the head of these lying media. And Obama, even in the last 30 days of his so-called presidency, I think of as a blight. He is extremely successful at deconstructing America, creating race and class war, and putting us on war footing, and showing us such disrespect with other nations. Our allies don't respect us, and our enemies don't fear us. It's just terrible what this Is the worst president in the history of the United States this monster?
I'm really sorry I wasn't on last week, because on last Wednesday I had an opportunity to brief Mr. LaRouche at some length on this anti-Putin hysteria that was sweeping the media, the Democrats, and also a lot of the rotten Republicans like McCain and Lindsey Graham and some others.
Oh, yeah.
And LaRouche said, well, look, first of all, they're not going to be able to do anything to change the Electoral College. So he was right on that. And by the way, this is all in writing. I'm not saying this after the fact, but this is something I wrote in an article last Thursday.
Right.
He said that the Russians, that Putin is an independent operator, has an independent creative character, and he's not going to fall into something stupid on this.
No.
Secondly, Lynn said he hopes that Trump will stay above it, and Trump did. Trump didn't get pulled into this thing. He just said, why would anyone listen to the CIA with all the lying they've done? And the fact that Trump refused briefings from the CIA caused the CIA guys to go crazy. And, he had a good point, that why listen to these guys when they're trying to manipulate you?
Right.
But the third thing LaRouche said is why are they so desperate? Are they aiming, I asked him, I said, do you think they're trying to delegitimize Trump and defeat Trump to pull off some kind of thing with the Electoral College or something else? And he said, no, they're desperate. They're beginning to feel the hangman's noose around their neck.
Yeah, but
he was talking about. Let me just finish the point.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
He was talking about Obama, Brennan, people like McCain and Lindsey Graham, because he said they've committed crimes against humanity under the Nuremberg Code, under the UN Code, under U.S. military code, the drone strikes, the regime change wars, the lying about what we were doing with Gaddafi, the arming of terrorists. What LaRouche said is that they're going to do everything they can to disrupt the transition of power to Trump, because they actually fear that Trump will not do what Obama did to Bush. Remember what Obama did to Bush? He protected him. He ran a cover-up. He continued the same policies. If Trump fully breaks with Obama and Bush, which it looks like he will on strategic policy.
He'll take both of them down, by the way.
Well, it's possible that they're going to end up in the dock somewhere, charged with crimes against humanity, including Samantha Power.
Yeah, and by the way, that means not just jail time, it means execution. How's that?
Well, minimally, it means they're going to be away from any influence on policy for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, they'll be...
now, what Lynn said is that just tell that to people. This is the desperate act of people who are seeing the scaffolding being built to hang them.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing is they're throwing up any canard that they can to disrupt the process. Now, we saw it last Friday when Obama goes on NPR and says, well, we don't have the report yet, but we know they did it. It's conclusive that they did it. And we're going to retaliate, but we're not going to let the report ever see the public. The public will never see the report.
Right.
Now, what did Putin say? Putin came out and said, if you have evidence, present it. If you don't, shut up.
Yeah, that's good.
Now, this was covered heavily in Europe. I don't think it was covered much in the United States, what he said at his press conference.
No.
The U.S. press said Putin made derogatory comments about Clinton. And they said he made derogatory comments about Hillary Clinton and he defended Trump. He didn't defend Trump. He attacked Obama. And he said that if Obama has any evidence, he has to present it.
Right.
Now, that's pretty strong. And what we're starting to see, an interesting thing in polling of Republicans in the United States, is that whereas a few years ago only 10% thought that you could trust Putin, now over 40% of Republicans in a poll last week said they trust Putin more than Obama.
Well, yeah, and I think it's like Reagan said, trust but verify. And it's easy to verify because everything that Putin does is a chess play that's easy to validate.
Well, and we see the effect of it. He said he was going to go in and clean out the terrorists in Aleppo. And he asked the United States to work with him. And Obama not only refused, but Samantha Power at the UN was saying that the casualties in Aleppo were due to the Assad regime. The Assad regime was taking back national territory under the direction of the National Army against an international terrorist force armed by the Saudis, the Qataris, and the U.S.
Right.
So Samantha Power is one of the largest purveyors of false news. And anyone who wants to throw out this false news nonsense should look at what's coming from Obama, from Josh Earnest, from Samantha Power, from Susan Rice, and from John Brennan. Exactly. These are the biggest liars on the planet.
Well, they can lie us into a thermonuclear war, too. I mean, things can really get out of hand here.
Well, and this is why LaRouche said you've got to give Putin some credit as an independent thinker. Right. At the same time, he's running this operation. He's working with Erdogan to bring Turkey into the fold. Right. And now we're beginning to see the effects of the One Belt, One Road, the new Silk Road policy coming out of China. And I saw this, I think I reported this a few weeks ago at a conference on Africa and Germany. And the Africans were saying to the Germans, why don't you do more like the Chinese for us? And these were leaders of African countries who were saying to the Germans, don't come in and dictate to us. We want your technology. We want to work with you. But you place conditions on us which we can't accept because they take away our sovereignty. The Chinese are coming in and building things with us.
Well, that's
and so we're seeing this new paradigm.
Yeah, Dave in Sacramento had a comment, I think it's in line with that, with the idea of sovereignty. Go ahead, Dave, with your comment or question.
Yes, I understood there was a discussion about terrorism, and my suggestion would be don't make terrorism by going into people's countries and killing their leaders, installing regimes, taking their resources, trying to install democracy. The United States needs to get out of the Middle East. We need to get out of these international entanglements and forge our economic, our energy, our labor, and our raw material sovereignty so that we don't have to worry about what's happening here.
No, that's what Trump is saying. You don't want to do regime change. It doesn't mean you withdraw completely, but you have a different role. For example, safe zones in the Middle East. The idea of stop doing regime change and trying to install a democracy in Muslim countries. It's not going to happen. I agree.
But the point that Dave's making is absolutely right. That what we've done, going back to the response to 9/11, especially with the invasion of Iraq, was the wrong answer to the wrong question.
Right.
You want to deal with terrorism? You want to deal with so-called bin Laden terrorism? Look at the Saudis. Instead, we have the director of the CIA now is basically a Saudi agent, John Brennan.
Right.
And the U.S. has been acting with the Saudis in the Middle East to destroy any regime that doesn't accept the globalist demand that they give up their sovereignty. So, Dave, you're absolutely right in your point. And I think a lot of Americans are starting to figure this out.
Yeah.
And, I'll just say this on Trump. What I was told by one of the top people around Trump is that Trump is not an isolationist. He's a non-interventionist.
Right.
And that's a good policy right now for the United States.
Well, look what the intervention has done.
That's a very good start.
Cost us $6 to $8 trillion, 35,000 dead Americans, another 50 to 100,000 permanently injured with psychological and physical disabilities, millions of Iraqis and Syrians dead. The nation states from Libya and so on now all balkanized and in fragments. And we think this is good. And now the massive immigration which we've driven out of the Middle East into Europe is causing a cultural clash that's cataclysmic. And for all this money we've spent, we've just created more chaos, more destruction, more death, and a more unstable world that's dangerously close to a thermonuclear exchange.
Go ahead, Dave. You had one other comment you wanted to make?
Yeah.
We're on the right track as far as installing leaders that understand that America needs to pull in our forces and basically defend our nation from external threats. Okay?
Right.
But ensure that we have our energy supplies, our labor, our raw materials, and define our borders. Okay.
Right.
To make our country sovereign and self-sufficient. And I'm not saying that we can't have trade. I just want to emphasize that what we need in America, we should get within our own borders. No more foreign oil, no more...
I would say something a little bit different from that, which is that you can make friends of people who we've made enemies. For example, instead of being aligned with regimes like the Saudis who are out to overthrow, or the Israelis who are out to overthrow anyone they can, we should be working with countries like Russia. We should get Germany to stop being our lapdog in Europe, because Germany can do a lot of good in the world with trade. And you can have trade that's done on bilateral and multilateral agreements that are not these corporate free trade swindles that were pushed by Bill Clinton, by George W. Bush, and by Obama.
Right.
And so if we do that, then we'll take countries that think they have to undercut us to survive, or have to build up their military to survive. Instead, they could work with us. And what it would mean is that our security, we still would have to have a strong military, but our real security would be in establishing a cooperative global economy that would be based on fair trade as opposed to swindles.
Well, I'll give an example of that. I'll just put an example of China. If you had China getting, like there was a company out of North Dakota going to give LNG for all the nuclear reactors in Japan, and they were also trying to do a deal with China to say, hey, you're building all these nuclear reactors, why don't we make a deal so you don't have to use dirty coal? They're actually having to close down factories and stop people driving in major cities in China because they're choking to death. And we could solve that problem right away. They also have tons of engineers. They've advanced the Bombardier high-speed rail systems, which they plan in the next 10 years to have 40,000 miles of high-speed rail in China. Why don't we hire their engineers to come over here and train ours? And, of course, we're so innovative, we'll just leapfrog forward and then start getting high-speed rail, high-speed transfer of materials to have total recycling, so there's no depots of trash. Everything is recycled right down to an atomic level. I think that we can make a much more stable world by just making deals like this.
Bill, let me just give you another example of something that happened that's not getting covered in the United States. The Japanese Prime Minister had a series of meetings with Putin in Russia. And what did they talk about? They've got these islands that are under contention by each side going back to the end of World War II.
Right.
And Abe said to Putin, his father and his grandfather said the key to Japan's future is peace with Russia.
Right.
And so they said, let's go ahead with the economic deals and let's plan on sitting down periodically and talking about how to solve this problem of who owns the islands. And this again blows Obama's Asia pivot, which was an attempt to destroy any kind of collaboration in Asia. Obama again is discredited. His legacy is in tatters. It's not just that he's the worst president, he's known as the worst president around the world. And the Americans, in spite of these polls where it shows Obama's so loved, I think the election itself was a repudiation of Obama.
Well,
except
I think
in these
there's a repudiation.
pockets of
There's two Obamas. There's the Obama that's a late-night TV host that's likable, who we shouldn't have as a president. And we have a president who's totally incompetent, evil, and a master of chaos and destruction. And the public likes the late-night TV host, the laughing, smiling, smirking Obama. If they actually look at the details of what he's done, they should, if they have any common sense, realize how destructive he's been to the American Republic and a danger to the world. So I think what you're saying is the repudiation was a political Obama. The late-night TV host is still popular. If he had a late-night show, he'd probably beat Jimmy Kimmel Live or Conan the Barbarian,
I think he'd run out of material. He'd run out of material in a week.
Yeah, but he could have idiots write up material for him. To be honest with you, that's his next job. He's got to become some kind of celebrity because he's such a narcissist. If he fades into anonymity, it'll drive him crazy.
Well, he's gone.
Yeah, well,
he's not gone yet. Look, this is important. Dave, he's not gone yet. And the possibility that he had something to do with the assassination of the Turkish ambassador. I don't know if you're listening earlier, but
right.
There's the word on the street in Turkey and Russia and in Europe is that it was a NATO CIA hit against the Russian ambassador to Turkey because he was the one who was coordinating the Russian, Turkish, Iranian cooperation that led to the defeat of the terrorists in Aleppo. And that was a big defeat for Obama.
Right.
So the Russian view is that this was an Obama operation.
You see what Obama did in the wake of all these activities. He took American citizens and put them on a list of terrorists. If they say certain things, they do certain things, they speak freely about Obama's policies or government policies around the world. Now all of a sudden you're on the watch list. Okay,
right.
That's what they did.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't be terrorism.
Right.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Bill and I are on that list.
They imposed laws on America that would prevent people from saying what they believe.
Right.
Well, nobody should hold back saying what they believe.
Let's get out of these global things and let's get America sovereign and safe and protected and stop freaking the noses of these people around the world to anger them against Americans and then, apply terrorist policies to our own people.
Well,
I think we agree on that.
Yeah, I think we're on the right track.
Yeah.
So where is this going now? We have a month left before the Titan team, I call it, the Titans of Trump, are going to take office. They're going to start cleaning up the swamp. They're going to start revising the economy. They're going to change foreign policy. They're not going to do regime change, but they're going to put safe zones. They're going to have a sit down and talk with Putin and with China. For example, the symptom of the South China Sea military bases is simply a matter that we aren't as a nation dealing reasonably with China, which means it's going to be win-win. It's not been win-win. They've manipulated their currency and doing things, but I'm certain we can clean up North Korea. We can clean up the access to the South China Sea.
Look, the Chinese returned the drone. They returned the drone.
They're just asking us to talk to us. Yeah. Don't people understand that? It's like they don't want to blow up Vegas. They want to buy it. They want to make our popcorn. They want to buy our theaters. Don't people get
Bill, I'll
it?
see you next week. I'm sorry I was not at the very beginning, but I'll be on with you next week.
Absolutely. Right after all of this. Merry Christmas. And we can say that now with Trump.
Merry Christmas.
And hopefully the people in Berlin can recover from the terror of that Berlin attack. Of the Masters of Chaos, it's the beginning of grace over America. It's the beginning of a move toward getting rid of abortion. It's getting rid of regime change. It's getting rid of people in our nation that don't want to support the U.S. Constitution. It's getting rid of the idea of privacy for unvetted people here that could be terrorists in our nation. It's the end of ignorance. It's the end of business deals that put America in danger of losing jobs and destroying the middle class. It's the end of progressive Democrats that are globalists that don't care if they destroy lives and people and families. It's the end of the old Republican Party, and hopefully it's the end of the Democratic Party. They'll revise it. So we have a reasonable group of people that kind of move toward the middle to try to deal with real issues for real people. And I'm really thankful. I mean, this Christmas, I'm so thankful to the Most High God for providing us all the technologies to provide and get people's health back. I had one gentleman, we had Ken, he had 15% heart function. He was dying. We got him on our nutraceutical protocols for his heart. We got him into the clinic in Northern California, which will be coming online with QRMA and hopefully soon metapathia testing. So we'll have one major site in either coast. For metapathia, what I do is I log into metapathia, and as a consultant, I can actually scan your body just like an MRI or CT scan and tell you, not only with your medical history and your other previous reports, what quantum testing results show and what kind of other tests we can do to actually validate and find out what's wrong with your body long before you have symptoms. This gentleman also got ECP, which is extracorporeal counterpulsation therapy, mild hyperbaric oxygen and pulse magnetic field therapy, which we have now smaller devices like the micro-pulse, stimulate stem cells, and the matrix pulse and turn off pain. We have other scalar technologies like lumen photon. We're trying to get further minor modifications to it, and microcurrent. So in the new year, lots of new technologies coming on board. We're also launching an Amazon store for technology and equipment that we don't carry, that they do. Things that we used to carry, like the Sinupulse Elite, ones I recommend like the HydroFloss and some other technologies. What I want you to know is that we're working for you to provide you the best information, whether it's geopolitical, spiritual, or wellness, so that, like Ken, he's now finished 90 days of working his tail off because his heart function's back. And we need to realize that much of conventional medicine or conventional geopolitics or even application of the law, you need to become a pro se litigant expert. So if you look at our course from Dr. Fred Graves on how to win in court, if you're having issues, you need to realize that we need to have the witness box, not the cartridge box. We need to have agreements that we need to rebuild the inner cities for all people, whether it's poor, white, black, Hispanic, so that every place in America is safe for a young person to go to school without joining a gang and to have a decent life and own a car and home and have a future. And we need to make sure that if you're an American, you have to realize that we hold these things for every person of every skin color, every background, except those that set their religion, like Islam, ahead of the American Constitution. And that can be revised, as I mentioned in the earlier segment. So, I'm very hopeful that we will overcome these things, and we'll help other nations overcome the conflicts by doing reasonable trade, reasonable collaboration with many different issues to protect not only the human race as we move forward and become a galactic civilization. This week they've launched the movie Rogue One with the Death Star and so on, with Darth Vader. And of course, it's one of these we called Star Wars universe movies